in a disaster, you often end up seeing, yes, the worst, but also the best of humanity. And so today, around this horrible hurricane, I'm gonna start with the bad and end with the good. With some of the worst news being that Hurricane Helene's death toll has surpassed 190 people at the very least, with that number almost certainly guaranteed to go up as the floodwaters subside and rescue workers pick through the rubble. And this is now you have Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas saying that while FEMA can meet the immediate needs from Helene's destruction, the agency it just doesn't have the money to make it through this hurricane season. And this notably as another storm, Hurricane Kirk, could make landfall on the East Coast by Sunday. Now that said, a bipartisan group of senators had asked Congress to approve extra disaster relief funding mid last month, but the stopgap bill that Congress passed to keep the government open only continues to fund FEMA at its current level, about $20 billion. And this, even though you have places like Moody's Analytics estimating that the cost of Helene's damage alone, that could balloon to upwards of $35 billion. And Congress, which just went into recess yesterday, they're not expected to come back until after the election, though we have seen Biden float asking them back early to vote on extra aid specifically for Helene. But there, we saw House Speaker Mike Johnson saying there's no necessity for Congress to come back, saying Congress has previously provided the funds FEMA needs to respond, so we will make sure that those resources are appropriately allocated. And adding there that it would take time to assess damage and calculate the cost of recovery and rebuilding. But we do already know some of the numbers, with FEMA already announcing that people living under emergency orders are eligible for a $750 payment to offset losses, as well as to pay for essential items like food, water, baby formula, and temporary housing. Which, anything is, yes, something, but also thinking that so many of these people that are going to be getting this have lost everything. And it's all just so horrible, though. Some of the horror stories out there, things that break your heart and make you furious. Like with a story around a plastic factory in Erwin, Tennessee, where several workers are already confirmed dead, more still missing, but now you have several surviving employees and relatives telling reporters that the company made them come into work even though the storm was approaching. Also adding that the managers let employees move their cars but didn't let them evacuate the building. So by the time that they decided to leave, it was too late. They were trapped. But then a handful of people trying to escape by climbing on top of an open bed truck, but reportedly it was struck by debris and flipped over. With one man telling NBC that included his mother and aunt who were clinging to coiled tubing covered with hard plastic. And recalling through tears, my mom lost her grip. She had a very sensitive shoulder she was struggling with. She didn't know how to swim. So from there, she lost contact with my aunt. And then another man last heard from his wife on the phone with her telling him that the power had gone out, saying goodbye and asking him to take care of their kids. And those who survived are now dealing with grief and the trauma of what they went through.
Not sleeping. When I do sleep, I dream of being in the water. Feeling that maybe if I could have stayed, maybe I could have done something more. But at the same time, I'm thankful to God that I'm here.
Now with all this, the company has denied the allegations that it did anything wrong, claiming that it never threatened to fire anybody and gave its workers enough time to leave, claiming that most people left immediately, but some stayed for unknown reasons. But now you also have the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation looking into what happened here, so hopefully we get some justice in the future. And then speaking of businesses not acting fast enough, this wedding venue in North Carolina allegedly left horses, goats, and a donkey penned up to drown in the flood, with reportedly one wedding guest claiming on social media that by the time that the guests found them, the water was already up to the animals' necks, with them then claiming that the staff said to let them die, but the guests refused and managed to save all but the donkey, which is now feared dead. Though this, as the venue has denied those claims, saying that its employees couldn't reach the animals and they couldn't instruct the guests to risk their lives to save them. So two different versions of events there. But that said, even after the weather calms, costs are added up and the bodies are counted, we still have to brace for the indirect impacts from this disaster. And actually with that, a study just got published that looked at 500 tropical storms in the US between 1930 and 2015. And it found that on average, a storm causes anywhere between 7,000 and 11,000 excess deaths over the following 15 years, which is fucking astronomical compared to the 24 direct deaths caused by hurricanes on average. And while with this, the exact causes are unclear, experts guess that it has to do with a variety of things that happen when entire communities are devastated. Like for example, dementia patients having their routines upended and care teams fragmented, or cancer patients getting their treatment disrupted. And there's also the pure stress of going through all of that, both mentally and financially, or maybe you have to withdraw from your retirement fund to cover uninsured losses, or maybe you're losing your home and it puts too much stress on your heart condition. But then also there's the really indirect harms, if not deaths, that are felt by people who don't even live in the storm's path. And an example of that right now is that Helene knocked out a plant in North Carolina that manufactures IV fluids for hospitals across the country, with the company now scrambling to line up backup plans and working to get production rolling again. We can see health officials expedite reviews of drug applications that would help relieve shortages and prod firms with FDA-approved saline products to add capacity if it gets to that point. But the fear right now is that we're gonna see shortages and even rationing if things don't turn around soon, which is also why you have experts advising hospitals to take stock of inventories and start workarounds right now, well, like having patients hydrate orally if they're able to, and manually pushing medications with syringes rather than an IV drip. And when taking in everything that we've talked about, understandably, there are a lot of people that take this situation very seriously, which is why one of the stories associated with the hurricane are people being furious at this OnlyFans model who did a mock weather report in Florida, or with Skylar Simpson donning a pink string bikini and wading through Tampa's flooded streets with nothing but an umbrella to protect her from 67-mile-per-hour winds.
Live reporting from Tampa Bay on Bayshore Boulevard. I think everyone's been a little.
With her captioning it, jokes aside, hope everyone is okay, and my heart goes out to all affected by the storm. With unsurprisingly, a lot of people not amused. One Instagram user commenting, hope a portion of the benefits you got through the likes on this reel, you sent some to help the families in need. And another adding, all for the clout, good for you, bet dad is proud. We had Simpson responding to the criticism by saying plenty of people actually affected by this have commented and laughed. I had family affected, they know it's humor of news reporters. So with that, you had a lot of people getting upset about a number of different stories. Like with what happened to this guy in South Carolina by the name of Jordan. He is a volunteer firefighter, Class 1 certified law enforcement officer and pilot with nearly 1,400 flight hours. Also, he happens to own a helicopter. So when he saw posts on Facebook from people begging to be rescued, he thought, no brainer. He loaded up bottled water and food. He took his son with him, who's also a volunteer firefighter, and he flew to a nearby airport, where he says he coordinated with communication channels with first responders and asked them where he should go. And so first, he dropped off supplies for a family. Then he rescued 2 women stranded up high on a mountain. Then he spotted an older couple stranded on the side of a mountain. Thing is, though, he didn't want to put too much weight in the chopper since the ground was unstable. So he just took the woman and planned to come back for his son and the man. But when he landed in a nearby parking lot where first responders were gathered, he says a high-ranking fire official approached and shut everything down. With them first accusing Jordan of not coordinating with rescue crews. Then when Jordan refuted that, he ordered the pilot to leave and never come back. And not only that, the official told Jordan that he couldn't even go back to pick up his son and the woman's husband. And as far as what happened next, it's a little complicated. Jordan says the official threatened to have him arrested if he took off, but the cops there were ambiguous about whether he'd actually be arrested or not, and he kind of got an implied okay from some other officials, so he went. But he was afraid that he'd get arrested when he got back, so assuming that he could only do one trip, he picked up his son and left the husband stranded on the mountain, with fire crews supposedly promising to find the man in the next few hours, but whether that actually happens unclear. What we do know that did happen, though, was that a temporary flight restriction was set up in the area not a half hour later, blocking any volunteer pilots like Jordan from helping. We've also seen different kinds of wild stories like that of David Jones, because he's a father who left South Carolina on Friday night for Johnson City, Tennessee to attend his daughter's wedding the next day. Something that would usually be a 2-hour drive, but 7 hours later, he still hadn't arrived because the roads were so decimated by Helene, with him eventually reaching a point about 27 miles from his destination where he couldn't go any further. With him then reportedly asking a nearby state trooper for any alternative routes, but the answer that he got was no, nobody is getting to Johnson City. To which Jones stubbornly replied, my daughter is getting married at 11 o'clock and I'm going to be there to walk her down the aisle. So the 64-year-old father, he parks his car at the bottom of the exit ramp. He grabs his backpack, shaving kit, underwear, socks, and a windbreaker. And he just starts walking, with him using his cell phone to light up his path, though he didn't have cell service, meaning he didn't have GPS. With him trekking through washed out roads and huge mounds of debris, doing pretty well until he fell into a patch of thick mud all the way up to his knees. Which, yeah, gross, but also potentially deadly. Because as he was stuck there, a backhoe drove right by.
And he doesn't see me. And of course, his cab is facing the other way most of the time, and he's swinging this thing around, and I'm ducking and really like, this could be it. And a lot of prayer at that point.
Though eventually he forced his right foot out of the mud, but it sucked his shoe off. With him then pulling his other leg out, digging back up those shoes, crawling on all fours over the debris until he finally got back to solid ground. With him then just continuing on and on until he came across a state trooper who offered him a ride 2 miles ahead to a town hall. And then from there, he kept going on foot using a reflective driveway marker that he found to keep drivers from hitting him on the narrow 2-lane highway. And after some 8 miles of this, a pickup truck pulls over to give him a ride. And much to Jones's surprise, he knew the driver. It was an old coworker from years back, so they chatted it up, caught up, all the way to Jones's home in Johnson City, bringing a 12.5-hour trip complete with 10 miles of hitchhiking and 17 miles of walking to an end, getting to that wedding, taking a nap, getting dressed, and making it to the church, where yes, he walked his daughter, who had no idea what he had been through, down the aisle.